This is House Planning Help, episode 324. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build or retrofit. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Alan Budden from Eco Design Consultants. I've known Alan for a number of years and he's always been at the forefront of Passive House in the UK, but his practice has probably carried out more domestic retrofits, I'm talking deep retrofits, than any other I know. And so that's why it's quite interesting to know that he's been at work on his own house, hoping to bring it to Enefit standard eventually. And this has all been part of a staged process. So it's over halfway now, and we check in with Alan in a moment. So I like to start the podcast with a resource when I have one to share. And I don't think I've ever done this before, but I decided to make that resource my own podcast. What a good idea this is. But particularly an episode that Alan was involved in, going right back into the archive. And this is why I bring it up, because it's a long time ago. But the topic was so good, so important, so relevant. The title of the episode was How Simple Design Decisions Can Impact on Energy Performance. And I'll tease a couple of bits within that podcast. We talk about the shape of the building and how that can make a difference. Alan goes on to compare a few different shapes of building. And ultimately, what this is adding up to is your building cost. It's going to increase with more complexity. And then the other topic was around windows and why it makes sense to minimize the amount of framing that you use. So he goes into all of that. Really good episode, houseplanninghelp.com/65 to go back in time, but we'll also link that into today's show notes. Let's get to our featured interview today with Alan. And there's something satisfying about seeing people practice what they preach. And Alan is midway through a phased retrofit of his own home. But I was interested to hear that more of his clients were also going down this staged route.
The client's age group is changing a little bit now. A lot of it were early retirees or about to retire, that sort of age, the baby boomers. Now it's becoming much younger families. But unfortunately, they've got less budget, which is understandable. And now we're looking much more into doing retrofit by stages so that we make sure we've got the whole house plan for the whole house considered. So you know everything's going to be spot on in terms of the retrofit and isn't going to cause any issues. And you're optimizing each of those areas, but maybe not doing all in one go. So maybe, like I'm doing here, to be honest, I mean, very same reasons, didn't have the money, so had to do the first floor in the first go, then later on moved downstairs we're just about to start downstairs doing the lower floor.
Maybe you could run through the pros and cons of just doing a whole thing all in one go versus this staged business. Why is it different?
Doing it in one go would be way easier and cheaper overall, to be honest. There's lots of junctions you have to consider in terms of how it's going to be weathered and work during that stage. If it could be 6 months, it could be 10 years between stages. So that's one of the issues. So you end up detailing things, the final construction, detailing it back. And then you've got trades. So an electrician is going to be much more expensive if he has to come back 3 times rather than maybe can do it all in 2 days. So there's lots of, and disruption and everything else is just, there's more of it and longer. Yeah.
So you don't really choose to do a staged retrofit. It's making progress with the money that you have.
It is. I think that's the only reason really you would do that. The other thing with stage retrofit, you could potentially move around the house a little bit more. So you could potentially stay in place a little bit and move from one area to another if you've got a big enough house as well. Sometimes it's just not possible.
When did you decide that you wanted to do a retrofit?
I think not long after I moved in the house for 18 years ago. At that stage, we did have we still have it downstairs, single glazed windows, and I need to replace them. And it was very much, I don't just want to go for double glaze, I want to go to triple. So let's start saving. And it's gone from there, really.
And when did it get serious then? Because you being in the business and specialising in this, did you have plans right in the early days of what you would like to do?
I put a planning application in to do the changes. How long ago would that be? Well, I had to renew the planning once, And the second one was then extended because of COVID. And then we just felt we just had to get on with it. And to be honest, it was held up partly because I wanted to do the drawings myself rather than put it through the company. So I thought that was the best ethical way of doing it and wanted to do. So evenings and weekends were short, so I didn't have much time to do the detailing and stuff. So it took longer. So that was, 5 years, 6 years?
You mentioned planning as well. Have you changed the house a lot, or would you always need planning regardless?
We have. I mean, that was one of the decisions early on, was that though we're going to retrofit the house and do lovely insulation and stuff, I wanted at that stage to make the house a little bit different to the ones in the street, just so that an estate agent would look at it and say, yeah, it's bigger, it is worth more. So I could kind of add a bit of value at the same time. And also, so we added a dressing room and extended ensuite and stuff upstairs, where the first floor was slightly smaller than the ground floor. And so we took over basically a loft area above our utility room and squared up the building. So the form factor got better. So the passive house was better. So that was where we added some space. We also added a mezzanine in my son's bedroom. That was partly through the use of some innovative roof panels, which I'll maybe talk about a bit later, that meant that we could take out the roof trusses in that room and gain a bit of space there as well.
So the early stages then, before we come to the roof, I know that again, that's another opportunity that you had, but what do you need to do? What are those first steps of the retrofit?
The first step really is to plan what you want to do as the end goal. So the architectural layout and so forth. So like I said, trying to simplify the shape if you can. Looking at the future, seeing how you might want to live in the house. Because to be honest, doing this work, this is now a house for life. You don't think we'll be moving, but who knows? The second step is then the PHPP, working up what standards, how we're going to get there to the NFIT standards, what that means in terms of insulation, windows, and all the areas. So a lot of time doing that. I then spent a fair bit of time optimizing it and looking at costs of various materials and trying to optimize that, and looking at the embodied carbon as well to try and see which installations would be better where. So I looked at some interesting things with the external wall upstairs, which is on a timber framework projected off the wall with GRP brackets with just ordinary cavity wall insulation inside. So I looked at the Drytherm 32, the Drytherm 36 and a couple of others. So different types of mineral wool. And as it was less, the thermal conductivity was worse, the density was less, and the embodied carbon was less, and the cost was less. So trying to optimize how thick the insulation was and which ones I used was quite interesting, and depending on what sort of brackets I could get as well. So from timber frame, so it's quite a complex lot of options I looked through to try and do that.
And all of this in your spare time, did you say?
It was. Yes,
that's your weekend project.
Weekends and evenings, yes.
Just to continue from work with something completely different.
Yes.
So how long did that take you then to get a comprehensive plan, or can you do it piecemeal?
It took several years, I think. I mean, that was kind of the reason really why the planning kept getting extended, because it was just trying to find the time to do that, and life gets in the way.
Well, that's it as well, because am I right in saying you stayed put, or is there any part that you did move out?
No, we've stayed put throughout. Most of the works in the first phase were external anyway, so we could stay within the house. There was a bit with the roof that was a bit cold and wet, but that was okay.
I've been here a couple of times when different things have been done, but what were the first things? And then logically, when we get to our roof panels, we can dig into that a bit.
The first thing really upstairs was sorting out the extension. So we took the roof off the utility room and extended up. So extending up the walls, stripping back the roof, membrane over the top of the roof. Then it was the windows. So we replaced the windows on the first floor. We then did an air tightness membrane around the first floor. Now that was the Sega Magpel 500. So it's a stick-on air tightness membrane, which was, I think, one of the first times it'd been in the UK. It's been used a lot in America. It's in feet, unfortunately, so it's a bit more difficult to measure. But anyway, it worked quite nicely.
And you're getting involved in some of this?
Yes, well, to be honest, we did a lot of that ourselves. I took opportunities where we thought, okay, that's something that we can do as a family. And also that's going to save us some money, so we can stretch the budget a bit further, and we can hopefully go a little bit further in terms of the retrofit. Maybe also because of the delays on the roof, there was going to be a delay in the program anyway. So we put on the membrane on the outside ourselves over the weekends from the scaffolding, and the builders then came and put the brackets on and the timber framework, and then we filled it with insulation, and then we did the membranes on the outside of that.
Going between you and the builder, does that all just fall together nicely, or was it slightly confusing?
It did. I mean, it was difficult because, I mean, we're a good builder, and he was happy to slow things down. And a lot of the time, we basically just had one person on site doing stuff, which was maybe wasn't great for him in terms of economics and stuff, but it worked for us. And that was mainly because of the roof being delayed, and so we could continue on things slowly. But it meant paying a lot of money on scaffolding. We had scaffolding for over a year, which the scaffolder taking down wasn't happy because it was all rusted on.
Rusted on, is that one of the downsides? That must be part of the scaffolding trade, though.
Yeah, I think it is. But I think it was a scaffolder complaining that it's going to take longer and there's a bit more hard work to get them off, I think. But, yeah.
So this roof then, tell us about this idea and your involvement.
Yeah, this is something that I've been working on a long time, to be honest, with a group of other colleagues and companies. Innovate UK project, developing a structural roof panel that includes PV and some solar thermal, using that to heat the house and do other bits and pieces. So we'd done some early experimental stuff, and that went fairly well. And then we got a second round of funding to do some test panels, and that was being developed. And kind of halfway through, I put my hand up and said, yeah, okay, I'll have the test panels, and you can use my house as the first test house. Because I was looking to do very similar things to my house anyway. So it meant that I could have the roof panels, and that would help with the economy of things. But also it meant that we could trial it, and I could really find out if this thing works, how it works, and not risk it on a client's house. There was a few issues with the panels that meant that it was delayed, partly COVID. So there was issues with COVID stretching things out. And there were also issues about some of the technology underneath it to cool the panels that didn't work as we'd planned, and we tried various other ways, and the cooling bit isn't working at the moment. And I'm hoping, we're making some new panels shortly, to lift 2 of the panels off and replace them in the new year, so we can get that plumbed in and we can see how much energy that's also reaping from the roof and how that's helping to improve the performance of the PV.
So why is it a good idea to have all these things together? That must have been part of the idea of combining them.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing was, I think you were here, Ben, when we put them on.
I'm just asking, just to recap.
Yeah.
I know the answer.
Yeah, I mean, we got the panels on in a day, which is fantastic. And it means that if these panels are being lifted on with the crane on in a day, there's reduced health and safety issues. There's not people working at height for any lengths of time. It means that it's all carefully manufactured and made properly. And it means that hopefully we can retrofit houses quickly and easily without disruption moving forward. But also combining them together just helps bring some of that economy of scale, we're hoping, in terms of parts of the element doing more than one job. So it's the structure and it's doing the PV and the rest other things all in one go.
And are things moving that way to more off-site, or does cost then mean that people are just out in the elements trying to save money? Where's the balance there?
It is incredibly difficult because, yes, the quality's up, should be quicker to build and all those things. But you start looking at some of the companies now who are doing a lot of off-site manufacture, and a lot of them are failing and are going under. And you kind of wonder why, because you think it would make so much sense. But in some ways, building on site is cheap. There's no little overheads. There's no storage and delays of big containers being needed later, and some of those things that make it difficult. It's a shame, because I think it is the way forward, and I think that's what we need to be doing, but there's possibly a middle ground.
Yeah, there are pros and cons with everything, aren't there? So the panels go on, you have to support them along the ridge so you can lift them on quickly. You made a few adjustments, didn't you?
Yeah, in terms of the house, most of the panels could just sit on top of the existing trusses. So it's the same weight as the tiles, so there's no additional weight, so they can just sit on the existing trusses. Before we fitted it, we put an air tightness membrane over to keep it waterproof and airtight, and a batten along just below the ridge, which allowed the panel to sit onto when it was lowered in place, before it was bolted in place.
Maybe I'll come in with another question there on this air tightness membrane. So it can be exposed to the elements for a while. Is that correct? Because I've actually come across another even this weekend, I've been talking to someone who's done something very similar, and I thought, Alan, you're crazy doing this, but is this quite common? Or not common, but...
No. Generally, the manufacturers would suggest it was done within a month, up to 3 months at a push. My roof was left exposed for just over 6, including the winter, which is not the best of times, which meant that I was getting condensation forming on the inside because the insulation was planned to be put on the outside, and I had some insulation left in the loft to keep us a little bit warm in the winter. So I was having to mop it down, which shows you really, and the amount of water I was taking off was quite considerable. I mean, at the worst times, I almost had a bucket full of water. I was at the end of it for my mop. And it does show you how much moisture you're putting out as a family. And if that's going to condense somewhere, that could cause all sorts of problems. I could see it, I could deal with it. And now, obviously, that's gone away. But the membrane did survive, including the big storm. I know when the Millennium Dome blew off. The panels were coming the following week. My wife, we both worked from home that day for obvious reasons. And my wife said, the roof's gone. And so she went out, and it had blown up and down a little bit, but it was still all in one piece, attached at the edges on this bit that had come up. And that was basically stuck on with double-sided sticky tape from Sega, which is fantastic stuff. It really shows how it worked.
In terms of speeding that up, so you were just waiting for your panels? Was that the
That was it. That was it, really, because the issues we had, and with COVID, it just got longer and longer. So, yes, we were about 6 months late, really, on those panels, which is why the whole thing took longer.
And do you think the airtightness membrane deteriorated at all? You're obviously someone who's got good knowledge. Can you tell by looking at it or not really?
The colour of it changed slightly. You could see that the lettering was less red. There was a little bit of mould growth as well from the condensation forming on the side. That's pretty much gone now. There's a little bit showing, but it's all nice and warm and dry now, so that's not doing anything. So yeah, I'm pretty confident it's okay.
We move on in the retrofit, and once you've got that on, is it just a case of externally tidying things up? What else was left to do? Because you've done all the insulation, hadn't you, on the outside? Yeah,
so we've done the insulation, we've got the membrane on, roof cassettes went on, we then got all that plumbed in and tried all the magic things with that, then insulated at the eaves and the ridge, got the cappings on and those things, got the cladding finished off around it, and that was most of what we did externally. Then after that we did a bay window on the ground floor, so we couldn't do that until the scaffolding was down because it was getting in the way, so that was the next project. And then putting the roof back on the garage and things like that where the scaffolding had to go through, so that was quite a weird garage where you could half roof and half open.
What about ventilation and switching on the MVHR? Was there a logical time for that to be switched on?
Yes, I think you want to do it relatively soon after you've made the house airtight and you've got the windows in, because there is that build-up of extra moisture and stuff, and also getting the CO2 down. And one of the good things about the roof panels and stuff, we've got lots of monitoring in. So each room, we've got a CO2 monitor and a temperature monitor. So that's been quite interesting to watch how those things have been building up into various rooms. And again, with my roof, you can see the moisture happening there. So having the ventilation system early is, I think, really important. The downside of that is you do need to go through more filters because you will get, the filters will clog up with the dust and the dirt, and from both the outside and the inside. So we were then switching off if the builders were doing anything particularly dusty and dirty. So if they were cutting the cladding or anything in the garage, we'd turn the MVH off for a while they were doing that.
What about these sensors then? Have you been able to draw any useful information from them yet about the house? Because your strategy, you've still got a few windows, for example, that need to be swapped out, haven't you?
Yeah. So basically all the windows upstairs have been changed because they were within the external insulation, so they're opening inwards. On the ground floor, we're doing internal insulation because I want to keep some of the brickwork to match some of the other houses in the estate. So those windows are going to open outwards so we can maximise the insulation onto the frames on the insides. So there's a number of windows downstairs still to be done. We did take a few opportunities to insulate some of the windows on the ground floor. For instance, outside our small little TV room snug and the downstairs toilet, because there was some external cladding there with some vertical patterns instead of horizontal, just to emphasise a bit of architecture and also squeeze in a bit more external insulation. So yeah, there's a number of windows to come, and we split it mainly because the two different types of windows, and they were coming from different factories and were having different delivery charges, so it didn't make sense to necessarily ordered them at the same time, so they were delayed. And in fact, by delaying it, it does mean that I've got slightly better windows now for the ground floor. This is the Green Building Solar Ultras. They've now got a new range of slightly slimmer profiles and better performing. Should be getting those in January. One of the things I think has happened because of the extended program has meant that we've been able to keep going, to be honest. We weren't necessarily expecting to do the ground floor stuff straight away, but it's kind of carrying on now. And to be honest, because upstairs is so much warmer than downstairs, it's really given us an emphasis to say, we just need to get this done. You kind of realise the difference. Generally, upstairs has been about 3 to 4 degrees warmer than downstairs. And that shows all the passive house physics is, to be honest, that air moves when there's 3 to 4 degrees difference. That's exactly what's been happening.
Can I just go back to the insulation? So you're insulating internally downstairs. Now, I know generally you would want to insulate outside unless you have to go internally. So how are you avoiding risk? And you obviously are not concerned for your own house of risk internally. You've done this enough times now to have a bit of confidence in the insulation strategy and just making sure that moisture is managed?
Yeah, that's correct. So in terms of thermal stuff, the cladding on the first floor does go down to window head height, so below the ceiling, so we can have an overlap. So the insulation downstairs will go up into the floor zone. So there's going to be about 600 to a metre overlap, so that's good. With the internal insulation, you need to be quite careful about interstitial condensation, about the moisture moving through the wall. Normally, you're fairly limited on what you can do. My original calculations, I was only allowing 140 millimetres of insulation. Mineral wall between the timber studs. As time's gone on, new membranes and technologies come around. So we're using the Sega Madrex membrane, which is a new single directional membrane. It basically works similar to a cactus. First thing in the morning, there's dew, it will absorb the moisture, and then it will hang on to it for dear life during the day when it's really sunny. So it's using that type of technology to make sure that moisture can only dry out of the wall and it can't go in. It's been developed for flat roofs, and we've used it on flat roofs for a few times now, where we can increase the amount of insulation between the joists, keep it nice and skinny, and make it really quite robust. So what that's meant is that we can actually put up to 200 millimetres of insulation internally. I've done my calculations, and I think I'm going to do 175, just keep a bit more space, so I've optimised it a bit there. We're going to do that and kind of trial that. I think my wife hadn't quite realised when we had the open days, and I was saying that we're trialling this on our house. She hadn't realised quite how much experiments I'm doing. But it all's good. She's happy.
So what is left then to do? Because you've done all the major building work now, haven't you? Although, I suppose, would you say changing a couple of windows, is that still major building work?
Yeah, I think it's almost now over to us to do bits and pieces, weekends and evenings and things. Whereas the windows, definitely want to get some builders in to do that, because you want it to be done nice and quickly, and you don't want the wind and everything else getting in. So that's the next major bit of building work to happen. And then basically, as a family, we're going to tackle room by room to do internally. So we'll put some stud work up, insulate it, membrane it, replasterboard it, and finish it off. And also on the ground floor, what was going to be phase 3 that I think might happen at the same time is the floor insulation. The plan is to dig up the screed, put down a phenolic insulation and a board on top. My original calculations show it would be 50 mil is needed, 50 mil of insulation. And where I measured it in the corners of the living room, that was okay. Unfortunately, when we went to the bay window and I had to dig up some of the screed to strap it down, it was a bit thinner there. So at some point when we do it, we'll have to see how much is left and how drastic that might be in terms of digging up more concrete, or how that's going to work. Because the windows have been designed to fit nicely up into the soffit of the first floor and to be nice and flush at the ground floor. So there's no wriggle room really to move that insulation up or down. And if it goes up too far, stairs don't work and doors don't work and all sorts of other things. So yeah, that's going to be fun.
You opened your doors for the Passive House Open Days. So what comments were you getting? What were people interested about? All
sorts of things from what it's like to be in the house. I mean, a lot of people commented on how nice the air quality was, which is kind of through the ventilation and the comfort levels, which I think is the same with all passive houses, to be honest, until you go and visit. So I'd highly encourage anyone to go and visit. They really liked the bay window on the outside. I quite liked going around the house and you show them around the back and yeah, this is really nice. And then you go around the corner, oh, this is nice. And again, as we went upstairs, and we looked into my son's bedroom and then saw the mezzanine. Again, that was another nice surprise.
Yeah, how would you describe the look on the outside then? How have you updated it architecturally?
Our house was brick with a tiled roof. It had 2 projecting bits, one at the front, one at the back, one around the staircore, and one little projected study bedroom area on the rear that were timber clad with horizontal timber boarding. Some of the other houses in the estate are timber clad on the whole top floor. So aesthetically, I thought, okay, I can do the whole of the top floor with timber cladding, so it looks like the other houses, but I'll make it a little bit more modern, a little bit more crisp. So we've used black hardy plank, so that looks really quite sharp, whereas the other houses were dark brown. And then instead of the tiles on the roof, we've gone for a anthracite grey metal standing seam roof, which has the PV, thin film PV stuck to it. So again, that looks quite crisp and neat. So on the outside, I know I've shown people that they think it's a new house. So that's quite nice, I think.
Yeah, I think you've done a good job because it doesn't look completely out of place. Yes, it's very stylish, and you can tell compared to the other ones that it's something modern. So I think that's a great job you've done there. Okay, let's talk about some of the general themes then for retrofit. And cost is one of the ones that I get confused by, because you want to do a whole house retrofit, don't you? You can't just do bits. It doesn't really add up to the same thing.
That's right. I mean, what do you do? Do you maybe not do, I've gone 200 millimetres on insulation here. Do I just do 100? So if I did that, how much would that save me? Okay, it'd save me maybe £1,000 on the insulation, maybe a little bit on labour. Well, that was me, to be honest, so nothing. So it's not going to save that much money in terms of the way it's done. So I would do each bit well and maybe do less of it, which is kind of where we phase it. The other thing that I think in terms of costings and how you look at the overall cost, do think about the add-on costs. So there's maintenance costs that you should be doing anyway. And to be honest, the timber cladding on the house was, I've painted it a couple of times since we've been here, but it was shot. It needed replacing. A windows, single glazed, needed doing. So adding insulation at those points makes perfect sense. So you can look at it in terms of the maintenance cycles and also the benefits, the health benefits and stuff. I'm sure they're going to be much better now we've got a nice, healthy, warm house going forward. That's going to make a huge additional benefit to the cost of it and kind of what people talk about, the payback period, which I think is a questionable thing, isn't it?
Any other tips for good, solid retrofit, or maybe learnings from your own project? Because it's different when you do it yourself.
It is, yeah. I think get a plan and stick to it. One of the bits I'm not enjoying quite so much is in our utility room and kitchen. I had already insulated some of the wall there with 50mm polystyrene, mainly because at that stage I was worried about the interstitial condensation, so I was limiting it to what I could do. But because now I'm insulating some on in the garage side as well, I can increase the thickness of the insulation internally. So I'm having to take out some insulation to put different stuff back in, which is a little bit frustrating, to be honest. So get the whole plan done, make sure that works, and then do bits towards it, because that way you're not going to be replacing those bits. So that's definitely something I would say I've learned from the plan. Look to see what your skills are and what you can do. So air tightness taping and things like that is relatively straightforward. I was also fortunate that our offices are very close and I was working from home a lot, so I could be here for when the builders had a question. So they'd come and tap on the window and I'd come out and help.
When do you do your air tightness test then, when you're doing it like this?
Yeah, that's a really difficult one because there's no real time to do it. So I was looking to do this step by step and go to Eurofit, which is step-by-step certification. Not sure we are now, partly because it's going to take more time for doing the PHP and other things, which I'm kind of getting on with the build instead, and it's progressing on quicker. So we did an air pressure test as we were working through the first stage. So we got, before we put the roof panels on, we did have Paul Jennings come and do a test, partly just to see if we could find any holes that we'd missed and we could put right. It wasn't necessarily about getting a number, though we did tape up some of the windows downstairs with some masking tape and stuff and try and hold those holes, and got down to 1.7, which was okay. I was kind of hoping a little bit more than that, to be honest. I was hoping it was almost enough to say that the external brickwork was airtight and we were pretty much there. But yeah, so we got down to 1.7, and it did highlight a few bits, so we've put those right. So then with the roof panel and everything else on top, I'm hoping it's even better than that now. I'm quite tempted to get back to do another one, I must admit. But now when we're getting the windows coming for the ground floor, I'm tempted to wait until we've got those windows in, then doing it. Most of the airtight should be sorted by that point.
And this brings into focus that moment then of what can you do if it was still 1.7 the next time he comes? What can you do, or have you missed the boat a little bit?
I think probably missed the boat in most places, which is the issue. That's kind of the same thing as Kinva in terms of programming stuff. So that is the biggest risk. And so it's real attention to detail to make sure you've kind of done stuff
and
where you can.
More of a risk on phased retrofit.
Oh, hugely. That is by far the biggest risk. But I did buy a little blower door to try and do this stuff, and to be honest, it hasn't been out of the box as much as it should be. That's one of my regrets, I think. I think I should have made time and made sure we did it, and then we could see how things were progressing.
But was part of that thinking, I know how to tape and I'm doing this and I can't see any problems? Is that because, I mean, you must see enough of this stuff to get a feel for it. I know Paul will never say he can tell by looking at a building what the number's going to be. But
yeah, there probably was a bit of that, and a bit of over taping and other things. So with the roof being off for so long, I was up there quite a lot taping stuff up, and you knew it was right because the water wasn't coming in as well. So there was areas where the water was starting in a few areas. So there's bits that were done. So I've been over and taped. We've got through rolls and rolls of tape. My son has been doing a lot of taping with me, which is great, but he's a bit sick of it now.
Well, as we wrap this up then, is there any parting thought that could be useful or more tips on retrofit?
I would probably say just make sure you plan it out. I think that's the key thing. So get it all sorted early, and then you can work your way through. Look at the phasing as well. So in terms of airtightness and how membranes and water work together and how that works, and moisture coming through the walls, just think about all those things. I'd also say it's probably going to be a house for life for doing this, if you're doing this. So think about how life might change, and maybe think about how the layout of the building might need to adapt to the future. So you build that in as you go along.
Alan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. It's been nice to see you again.
Get more in our show notes, which you can find at houseplanninghelp.com/324. You can review the main information in the summary we provide, also some photos of the work that's being carried out, including those innovative roof panels being put on. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, you can do that within the show notes. And of course, a link to Eco Design Consultants. So interesting him saying that in some ways you've got to think about this deep retrofit as a home for life, because that made a lot of sense when he said that. I just thought there's so much work that goes into this that it's the same as building a house for yourself. You want to appreciate it afterwards. So definitely bear that in mind too. houseplanninghelp.com/324. My call to action is to check out the Hub, which is our membership community. We're always aiming to simplify the self-build journey, and we've got a new video that we've put in of our Kinva retrofit. So Alan's practice Eco Design Consultants is behind this as the architects who've been advising. This one sees the big windows go in, so right up at the top of the house. We'll also link in our episode with Guy that we did recently. They're putting in these probably overly large windows, but it's going to look fantastic out onto all the garden space of these Victorian terraces. That is one great thing about the Victorian terraces. They generally have this, don't they, that the back gardens back onto other gardens, you get this beautiful green space, and that's also on the south side. So at the top of the house, there's no doubt it's going to look spectacular. But how do you do that? These windows are not light. Q bring in one of only 3 cranes in the UK that is capable for the job, and it just makes a really interesting episode to see the work that goes in, all the safety stuff that is paramount on this. Everyone has to disappear away from site when they're lifting these windows in, and then making sure that you've secured it one side before you release. So all of that in our latest episode in the Hub, houseplanninghelp.com/join if you want to find out more, including all the courses, the forum and the office hour if you want to have a chat with me. That's it for today. Next time, architect Mark Siddle returns to the podcast, and we're going to be looking at some of the impact of air movement around insulation. This will be why we want to put the insulation in properly. Thank you so much for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.